We're on 99.3 KCMD, FM 106.7 KMED. And this is the Bill Meyer Show.
I guess I shouldn't be questioning too much about Wu flu COVID. I'm looking here on the Fox News crawl right now, 1,000 plus soldiers to go to New York City to help fight COVID-19. And then I think about the experience of the sailors on that naval vessel and the commander who was relieved on that. Is that such a good deal? But I digress at this point. All right. But, someone who has interesting thoughts on this issue before us here right now is Scott Wheeler. He's the executive director of the National Republican Trust. And, Scott, we welcome you to the program. Good morning, sir. How you been?
Hey, thanks. Good to be with you, Bill.
Boy, what an interesting history here because, I'm looking at some of your background in here and as an investigative journalist. And so you're the one that actually blew the whistle on that China theft of U.S. national security tech back in the 1990s. You're the one, huh? You're the guy. How interesting.
There were others that followed us, but in general, we were first. I was the first journalist in China to investigate it, and we were all over this, and I'm still to this day shocked. I've written dozens of articles and for the Washington Examiner, the Washington Times. I was for our television series, American Investigator. We reported substantially on this from China and from other places around the world, and I cannot believe to this day that no one is paying attention to this.
Are you speaking of the China technological theft that continues even today? Is that what you're referencing?
That and the link between the Democrat Party and President Clinton and China at that time. If you recall, as everyone knows, we just spent 3 years accusing President Trump of whatever collusion is with Russia. But even if everything the Democrats claimed about Trump were true, if every bit of it were true, lies and all, it pales in comparison to what we proved the Democrats did in the 1990s with regard to collusion with China. You had Clinton decontrolling strategic weapons technology. We caught them taking millions of dollars in illegal campaign donations. Democrats like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin helped cover up the Senate and House investigations at that time into it. So all that they've said about Trump fails to even come close to what they did and is demonstrably provable that they did in the 1990s vis-a-vis China. And as a result, China leapfrogged. In 1994, they basically had what some described as a junkyard army. To 10 years later, they were rolling out stealth technology. They shot down a stealth aircraft of ours. So they helped. They taught the Serbs how to shoot down using a bistatic radar system that they developed because they stole stealth technology from us, or were had it decontrolled for them by the Clinton administration. All of that was discovered in the 1990s, and still to this day, we have yet to have an accountability for it.
Why do you believe that is? Why does there seem to be a two-tier system of justice? Those who are in the political in, so to speak, and those who are outside that, Scott?
Well, for one thing, the Republicans were too weak to take it on. A lot of people thought it would have, within the Republican Party, who were finding a lot of this stuff out, believed that it would undermine the United States' credibility around the world. It would destroy and tank the economy, things like that. I mean, if you compare again, Chuck Schumer accused President Trump of treason, this was far worse. And so you would have had to, in fact, Dick Armey, the former U.S. congressman from Texas, at the time said we may have to use the T word, referring to treason.
Is there a possibility that many Republicans are just not that comfortable with using power? Because the one thing I will say about Democratic candidates, for the most part, they love power, happy to use it. No problem. Give it to me, we'll do something.
Absolutely, Bill. That's the secret in Washington, D.C., is that Republicans don't know how to use power, and they're afraid to use it because the 85% of the media are Democrat Party apparatchiks, as I call them. Mm-hmm. They're not people like to call them liberal. They're not liberal. They would love the idea of being called liberal. These are my former colleagues. Some of them I know very well. They would love to be called liberal, and they love it when conservatives call them liberals. They are not liberals. They're party apparatchiks. And you needn't look any further than the China situation to establish that. 1992, probably the third biggest issue in that election year was Bill Clinton accusing George W. Bush of coddling dictators, George H.W. Bush, I'm sorry, of coddling dictators in Beijing and decontrolling weapons technology to China in an irresponsible way. Well, I mean, it was like, at that time, it was nothing. It was a couple of satellite launches that we allowed because we had to have the satellite capacity in orbit. Then Bill Clinton comes in and blows away every mechanism for controlling the spread of proliferation of dangerous weapons technology.
But you know something, though, Scott? That Slick Willie, though, he's really charming, though. He's really charming, and everybody gets together, has dinner with him, and goes to parties and things like that. You know, how can you think that someone like that's treasonous? Right? It's sort of, I think, the way it's pushed out there.
It is that partly that, and Clinton did something very, very diabolical to keep the press in his camp, because if you look at China, human rights in China in '92, which is a very important issue then to the so-called liberals, when Clinton began to cozy up to the butchers of Beijing himself, and they were paying him money, which started in '92, by the way, not in '96 like previously thought. But when he started to do that, the media took his side and they defended him. Suddenly, human rights in China was irrelevant to these so-called liberals. And what Clinton did to keep the media on his side was this very subtle argument that if you don't defend me, Jerry Falwell wins. And it was Jerry Falwell meaning the
moral majority side wing of the Republican Party. Yeah, I gotcha. Scott,
the media.
I'm glad. I wanted to touch on some of your fame there, and because you're still working it today. By the way, Scott Wheeler is the executive director of the National Republican Trust, nationalrepublicantrust.com, by the way. We'll link to all of his information. I wanted to bring it back here to what we're facing right now. And let me just explain what's happening in Southern Oregon. Oregon, in general, has not had as much of a Wu flu pandemic, although we've reacted just as hysterically as many other states here, Scott. But we're not as much of a progressive urban hellhole. We don't have as many of the big cities as you do, such as New York City or Washington, D.C., to an extent. And so you don't have the same kind of crowding, minimal public transportation except for Portland, places like that. We've not had nearly as much spread. Essentially, though, we have economically decided to crush 50 to 60 families for every one person testing positive for COVID. Not necessarily in the hospital, not dying, not dead, because we've had no deaths here, Scott. We've had 50, 60 families or so crushed for every person detected in this state and in our area here in Southern Oregon. And at one point, does it become more of a national economic emergency rather than a true medical emergency in the classic sense?
Well, in my estimation, Bill, you put your finger right on it, and that is the response, or as the president put it, the cure is becoming worse than the disease itself. And right now, 96% of counties in the United States are on lockdown, on shelter-in-place orders. And it is completely unnecessary. Like you point out in Medford, you don't have near the problem that they have in the Long Island case. It's a little different. That neighborhood that's being overrun with COVID cases happens to have Chinatown in it, and there was part of what happened.
But that's just a coincidence, right? You're not allowed to actually note that, because wouldn't that be racist or insensitive to make note of that, Scott? Isn't that the kind of culture we have right now? Yikes!
Well, that's what we're being told, but in order to specifically and scientifically track this, a lot of Chinese immigrants would have gone back to the Chinese New Year celebrations in China and then returned. And it was at that time that China was stifling any information about the virus, and so people would have unknowingly brought it back to New York And before anybody really understood how contagious it was, these people were interspersed throughout their communities as normal, and then it hit that Elmhurst area really heavily.
And then you also had progressive politicians in New York City, Long Island area. They were talking about, well, of course, go out to Chinese New Year. You wouldn't want to be thought of as racist or insensitive. Hug a Chinese person, all right? I'm not saying it's only from China, but that's where it started. We have to be, honest. That's where, we ended up having transit. And I think that's why you're dealing with so much of those problems on the East Coast in that major urban area.
Absolutely. And you also point out the people who are most hypocritical are the ones who demand that we pay attention to their science, but then as long as it doesn't offend their sensibilities with regards to racism or whatever they consider it to be racist.
So I think that President Trump, to a certain extent, and I don't like to criticize the president because I like him in many ways, but I get the impression that in spite of his best instincts, that he's almost being subsumed by a medical deep state of sorts. I'm looking at the front page this week here, the paper. Hardest, saddest week is coming, says the Surgeon General. It's almost like they are programming us for disaster, and I don't know if this is helpful right now, Scott. How do you see it, and what do you think would be a healthier, no pun intended, policy approach to what's going on?
Well, here's a couple of things to consider. First of all, I think the president was put in an untenable position with his medical advisors, including some that he trusted, saying this country has never seen people dying in the parking lots of hospitals, and when you have that kind of jam at treatment centers, then a child with appendicitis is not going to be treated, and you're going to have unnecessary deaths that way. So he was presented this picture, and it's still possible that something like that could have happened. But the mitigating strategy is where I think he took the wrong approach. We should have immediately mobilized Army medical hospitals being set up around the country in places where, and following the trends where it was going to happen next, and then taking care of it that way, and then sort of isolating or quarantining people who were high risk for the disease. Now, a lot of this is easy to look back at and say, because you had you have a couple 2-3 weeks of history that you can look back on a Monday morning quarterback it. I mean, literally, it's what we're looking at right now. Yes, but I think the president wanted to keep the economy open, and he was just sort of and knowing that whatever he does is going to be, the Democrats would have attacked him for every single death. And so I think he was in this position and could not, and so he went along with the massive quarantine, probably against his better judgment. It seemed like he was indicating that publicly.
Well, Scott, you do realize what puts people out of business is to not be permitted to engage in business, and that's what's being experienced right now in the entire country.
Absolutely, and that making us economically weak puts us in a very dangerous position on national security, because a weak country economically cannot defend itself. And if you look at what Al Qaeda, ISIS, and some of these other terrorist groups are doing, they are watching our reaction. Hezbollah in Iran, they are watching how our reaction to this. And I've wondered for probably 18 or 19 years why we have not seen a biological attack from a terrorist group, because that would wreak havoc on the country and on the economy. Now they're watching; they're seeing how easy it would be. You know, they could send 10 different terrorists with say smallpox, for example,
sure,
into shopping malls, and boom, you've got a huge outbreak, and it would be devastating. So we're not handling this in the right way, I don't think, from a national security standpoint or an economic standpoint.
So it appears that the nation is willing to overthrow absolutely everything and go into a government-induced coma just with people getting sick, which of course ultimately means that is ultimately our weak underbelly, at least culturally, if we continue with this approach, wouldn't you say?
It is, and I think the president is now, he's got another 3.5 weeks to watch what happens. and then I think he's going to probably go against the conventional wisdom and what his advisors are going to tell him, and he's going to reopen the country, I think, and we'll have to see what happens then. We don't know. We've never been here before, of course. It's kind of become a cliche now, but we don't know what's going to happen as a result of that. We don't know how much damage we're doing each day that the economy is shut down like it is.
Scott, why do you believe, and this is something, a little bit of political philosophy involved here, because Democrats, the Democratic Party for the most part, and some never-Trumpers also, have been delighted to portray President Trump over the years as a would-be Duce Don, as it were.
Yeah.
And so why is it that they were happy to call him Duce Don then, and now they actually encourage him to take more Duce Don type activities or actions that I think President Trump is actually comfortable with? I know I'm trying to read his mind here a bit,
sure,
but I'm just talking about the way he reacts. Why do you think they're so happy with the president grabbing all of these big dictatorial powers, these Democrats?
Well, in fact, especially in the beginning, I thought he was being very wise in the way he did it, leaving it up to states and municipalities to make their own calls on lockdowns and quarantine. And I think it was because he was trying to not give them the ammunition to use against him that he's heavy-handed and he's a dictator, which they've accused him of over and over again of abusing power. And now here he is now trying to avoid abusing power, and they're trying to force him to use that power, like the Defense Production Act and things like that. And he's trying to delay it and not use it, or at least use it sparingly. But here's why the Democrats are all for this. They know once they get power back, the White House back, they can declare an emergency for anything they want, including global warming. And they will use disease as they'll say that global warming is spreading and causing more dangerous viruses and killing more people. They will use this power against us, and we may regret this day, this period right now for that reason.
Scott, best place to see this analysis would be GOPtrust.com, right? I want to make sure that I send people to the right location. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, sir. Yeah, GOPtrust.com or NationalRepublicanTrustPact.com. Same place.
What do you think is the actual strength of the Trump administration going into the fall? I mean, trying to predict is difficult. Generally speaking, during economic tough times, an incumbent gets tossed out. There's another side, though, that says maybe you don't change horses in the middle of a crisis right now. What is your gut telling you, given your experience?
Well, I think he's in more trouble than most of his supporters believe. I think a lot of people see him in a way that is, almost godlike. And he is actually, half the country is becoming more and more galvanized against him. His supporters are as strong as ever, but for the most part, there are some crumbling over this economic sequestration. But his opposition is as strong as ever and as virulent as ever, and that's going to be a problem for him. And I'm concerned. If
he gets the country opened up sooner rather than later, do you think that will help tamp down some of that weakness?
Yes, it should. And if we get a comeback and we don't have, you got to keep in mind the Democrats are going to use if we have another 40,000 deaths due to the virus, they're going to blame all of that on him and call him unnecessary. And the Boston Globe has already said he has blood on his hands. The media loves that.
Boy, you're right, though. It's like he's damned if he does, he's damned if he doesn't. And the other take on that, I don't know if I'm buying the death rates, too, because, the way I'm noticing how they've changed the protocol, you have a guy weighs 900 pounds, hasn't walked for years, has diabetes and, high blood pressure, heart disease. He catches Wu flu. He didn't die of everything else. It's just a Wu flu death. That's all there is here, Scott. That's all there is to it. And that is a very distorted picture.
I'm very concerned about those things specifically because you've got hospitals that they get an advantage for the amount of COVID virus treatments they perform.
Oh, it's kind of like government schools with English as a as a second language, right? And so they get more money for that, and so you want to make sure you have as many children who can't speak English as possible, or at least not proficiency. Same kind of encouragement. Wow.
You've got that side. Also, what we really need is and there's no matrix for this right now, but we need a measurement how much life lost. That means for every COVID death, was this somebody who was going to die in 3 months because they have emphysema or diabetes and hypertension and several other factors, or are these people who could go 20 years? But what we need is a matrix that measures what their life would have been without the virus. And that will tell us exactly how lethal the virus actually was, because we know it knocks out the weak and the sick, but by how much? The regular flu does that too, 60,017, I think it was.
Yeah, but nobody ever complains about that because it's just considered to be, a normal part of the winter and the spring. We know that, okay? Scott, appreciate the analysis and talk, and we'll link to this GOPtrust.com, GOPtrust.com, and it's going to be an interesting political battle this year. I know everyone says don't politicize everything, but everything is politicized, and so we have to work that and make sure that our funding is kept up here, too. And I really appreciate you coming on. We'll have you back. You take care now, okay?
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be with you.
You bet. It is 6:58 at KMED and KCMD, GOPtrust.com. We'll talk more coming up. News on the way, too.
At Bi-Mart, we're with you in this uncertain time. Every day, we see our members giving each other space and using safe distance when shopping. We see them giving each other a chance to buy high-demand products by following purchase limits. And we see our communities relying on Bi-Mart for a safe and clean environment to shop for their family's essential needs. From all of us at Bi-Mart, thank you for doing your part. We will get through this together.
Even in uncertain times, your biggest investment is your home. Designated as an essential business, Pressure Point Roofing is here to help you protect that investment. The project that you haven't wanted to look up at is still there. And with our technology, highly trained staff, and non-contact procedures to protect you, our valued customer, and your home, we can help check that honeydew box for you. Call Pressure Point Roofing today at 541-772-1945. We're all together on this one.
Southern Oregon Subaru is open for business. We've always strived to make Southern Oregon a better place, and we know that by working together, we'll make it through this difficult time. Our service department is open Monday through Friday. For your protection, we are consistently cleaning and sanitizing the entire dealership. Relax in our sparkling clean lounge complete with Keurig coffee and sealed snacks. Or you can choose to drop off your keys for remote service. We sanitize all touching surfaces in your vehicle when you drop it off and before you pick it up. Our sales team is ready to handle your new or used purchase. We are practicing social distancing and are compliant with all state government orders. We care about our employees as much as our customers. If you would rather shop from the comfort of your own home, just call or visit us online at sosubaru.com to get started. We can even bring a Subaru to you if more convenient. Let's continue to help each other during this time. Thank you, Southern Oregon, and be well.
Click sosubaru.com for details.
You're waking up with the Bill Meyer Show on 99.3 KCMD and FM 106.7 KMED.
Delighted that you're here. It's a minute after 7. We'll check the rest of the news and more coming up. Outdoor Report with Mr. Outdoors, too. And then we'll talk a little bit of farming, state land use, and how our policy, people have been concerned during the supply chain breakdowns that we've been experiencing due to Wu flu, if there could be food shortages. He says, not food shortage right now, but could be some real problems in the future here. I'll talk with Glenn Archambault about that coming up. A couple of emails of the day, sponsored by Rosario's Italian Restaurant, Wood-Fired Pizza, 2221 West Main Street in Medford. Everything that Rosario's makes and sells is on their menu and is available for takeout and or delivery. All right, find out more at rosariositalianrestaurant.com. Good eating. And Patrick Henderson has Bill, am I the only one who thinks this whole mess is part of a leftist plan with China's help to destroy Trump and take total control of America? Well, when you hear Democrats whispering openly now that, hey, this gives us the opportunity for another New Deal. I don't know if it's necessarily, well, they're fellow travelers, one communist party to another communist party, perhaps. It could be. Richard, RSB, says, hey, Bill, the worst week in American history? Is this guy serious? Oh, by the way, the person I was talking to was not was not saying it's going to be. Oh, you're speaking of the Surgeon General. I'm sorry, RSB. I understand what you're getting at here now. The worst week in America history. Is this guy serious? Has he never heard of the Battle of Antietam, polio epidemics, the 1964 Anchorage earthquake? As long as these government types keep getting paid while everyone else is caged, they enjoy being in the spotlight. In my opinion, the quicker people stop listening to these boobs and stop worrying about what the other person is doing and get on with their own lives, the better off we're all going to be. You know, it is interesting. You know, this is going to take a minute or two, but RSB, you're kind of keying into another one of my favorite emailers and listeners. Hans Albuquerque is what he calls himself. I don't know who this guy is. But he says, hey, Bill, change focus. Devin Nunez, what we know from the past is that there's a lot of people who don't show the symptoms. It's a mild reaction in general. He explained that letting local politicians and local doctors that are monitoring the situation on the ground decide would be a good option. But that's how we got here, local politicians. As of Sunday, the recovery rate in the U.S. is at 98.6%. As of Saturday, 1.1 million worldwide infected, of which approximately 300,000 had officially recovered. And of the remaining 880,000 infected, 95% with mild symptoms, leaving 41,000 people on the entire planet in urgent care. Now, this is from worldometer.com. And for the Oregon fear monitors or mongers, as of Sunday, your fear factor is 0.000238, which equates to 119 out of 500,000 chances of getting it. Yeah, here's your problem, though, Hans. When you start throwing those numbers, like I mentioned on my Facebook posting, so many people are dumb and they're dumb about mathematics, poorly trained in mathematics. They don't get it. I understand where you're getting at here. But he does say, let's focus on the fact that there's virtually no chance you're going to get it, and even slimmer chance you're truly injured. I'm just a dumbass, he says, out here regurgitating accepted statistics that any non-media loser can look up. Then why do we still hear about masks and gloves and safety versus the blatant facts? I'm PO'd. I'm disappointed. The deniers are the media, not independent street reporters out there researching commonly held stats. The facts disclose it is a political coup cloaked as a pandemic. And now, since any local politician can bootjack someone's livelihood, why not spread the poverty bill and cut all wages, PERS, and pensions by 50% during this phony baloney? Come on, join the fun, government workers. What's the matter? Not fair? Who are you people to pick and choose the losers? There's a mass of us out here, Bill, and we are teed off and done with it. They've destroyed our lives and security for nothing. They could have been handled with simple public safety warnings to live cleaner, but live. Does the inert protein exist? Yes, of course, but you see, a lot of us trust in God with our brains and our lives, not government. His will be done, not some bureaucrats. Not one of you gets our vote in December. From the dog catcher to the president, play God with our livelihoods and we will play dead. Hands done washing. Albuquerque. You know, Hans, I agree with a whole lot of what you're talking about at that point. And yeah, you're right. When the government says that you are not to be in business and you are to be crushed and government workers essentially held harmless, that's a real problem too. And your point about PERS, well taken. I really do. You know, if you're going to kill everybody else based on, well, there's no contract for them, but there's a PERS for every other government employee. Yeah. Maybe long term they'll be start talking about that, Hans. I really don't. I don't know for sure though. The one thing I will admit, I was thinking about this, and I do think that the public hygiene, the hands washing, keeping apart from crowds is always a good thing. I've always thought that though. I've always been thinking that, even just crowds in general. And you know, I have people in my family, and I work really hard to protect them. I'll give you an example. My mother, you know, she's 80 years old, and I have to make sure and do my best to try to protect her. So I do my best to help her not have to go out into potential infection right now, because it could be a real problem for her if, God forbid, she did. Linda, you know, we talked about her chemo from last year. You have less of an immune system, and so she knows that she has to be more careful too. But notice that I'm saying that we have to be careful, but I'm not saying destroy everybody else's lives so that I keep Linda and my mother safe, as an example. I'm not saying that. There are things that I do to help. And that's the way I think that this entire situation should have been approached in the first place. This is the Bill Meyer Show.
If you're